I will directly answer that question, but if you may forgive me, I'd like to take this opportunity, first of all, to apologise to all the people who believe in the BBC and care for it and wish it to survive and thrive. I'd like to apologise to the licence fee payer who funds the BBC to deliver its mission. And I'd like to apologise to the thousands of people who work for the BBC, our staff, who work with such dedication and commitment to deliver the output we all enjoy so much. I regret the mistakes that have been made and the impact that has had. Let me now come to the question that you asked. Just, if I may ask you, just repeat it for me so I can answer it directly.
Did you block the head, did you and the rest of the BBC board block the head of news from apologising for the Panorama programme on the 10th of November?
You go back to the week in which the story broke in the Telegraph, and you wrote to me, and I was writing the answer to you. I heard that the news wanted to apologise for the splicing of the edit with a white spark. I did not think, I thought that was a necessary thing to do, but it wasn't sufficient, because the fundamental issue here was the sequencing of the edit and the placing of the Proud Boys march. I think the real issue here was the impression left that the President Trump, in his 6th of January speech, had encouraged, called to violent action. And what we had to apologise for was that, as well as the splicing of the edit. It's my view that editing interviews is a normal journalistic practice. So that in itself is not what the problem was. The problem was the impression that it led, that it was an impression that President Trump had called for direct violent action, and that wasn't the case, and that is what I thought needed to be apologised for. So the answer to your question is, I didn't think it was adequate. I thought it was necessary but not sufficient.
If you felt that that was the case, then why was there no apology when David Grossman first brought that to your attention?
You mean in the EGSC meetings in January and May? Mm. I think that's a very fair question, and I'm looking back, I think we should have made the decision earlier, I think in May, as it happens. In January, you've heard earlier that the report came about, which was about, the context was how well, as we do, constantly review our own coverage, how we did, what went well, what didn't go well, and we examined how we covered the US elections as a general point. And the report came back, as you've said, that coverage was on the whole excellent, but there were some real issues there. We're invited, and there was at that meeting also coverage of the Arabic service, which we may come back to. I invited, which is normal, for news to give me a formal response to that research. That response came in May. When that response came, one thing I'd like to make clear is that this was a constructive discussion that took place at the EGSC. Some very important observations were made in that report, which the executives took on. For me, one of the most interesting ones was the recognition about the story selection idea, and I have a letter in front of me, the news report, you've got it, which said the BBC infrastructure is heavily resourced in the democratic areas, and we need to move into other parts of the US to get a better sense of opinion within it. And that is an action that's going to be taken, and there's going to be a movement of which our resources tap into not just the democratic heartlands where we have got, in a way, over too many resources that we need to move it out. I give that example simply to tell you all that this wasn't a discussion where you had a defensive news response to some very serious issues. So that was it. When it came to the Panorama edit, there was a difference of opinion across the board. And looking back, I think it would have been better for us to pursue it then. I completely accept that. And as we go into my own understanding of how we got here, it seems to me, along with the editorial and the governance, which are important issues which we'll unpack, I think there is an issue about how quickly we respond, the speed of our response. Why do we not do it quickly enough? Why do we take so much time? And this was another illustration of that. We should have, as a collective, we should have pursued it to the end and got to the bottom of it and not wait, as we did, till it became public discourse. I mean, I have a lot of things to say about my relationship with Mr. Prescott and that report and what he did.
We've got lots of questions to come on to along that line, but what I'm trying to get to, there's been a lot of speculation in the media that it was the inaction and the delay by the BBC board, and it's reported in the press as that there was a dispute in the BBC board that has caused so much of the dramas ever since. I'm just really interested to know why it took so long. Why didn't you get on the front foot? If you'd have got on the front foot and, either with an apology or with a robust defence, either I think, would have been an acceptable way of responding to this. But it's that huge delay. So, I mean, why? What was causing the delay? What were your reasons for delaying?
It seems to me there are two types of timeline. One is the one that began with the EGSC report in January.
I'm talking about when the
and then there's a
report.
week after the report was in some way leaked to the public and the Telegraph. Do you mean that particular?
I mean, as soon as the Telegraph started publishing this memo and its coverage of it, there was just a vacuum in the BBC for nearly a week, where there was no comment given of any meaningful way to the substance of it. Why didn't you get on the front foot with either an apology or some kind of defence of what had happened?
Well, precisely for the question you've just raised. I needed to understand what went wrong and to get the right answer. Getting the right answer was really important.
You knew what went wrong because you'd already had the Grossman report into this and your own...
When we went in that week, I asked the Director General to review, because I said we reflected on it, to review the clip and whether there were any serious editorial breaches. There were, as an outcome of that, and that was the research that had to be done to get it right. It took time to get it right. We knew what the actual apology was for. I said it wasn't just about the splicing, the editing, it was about the impression, and that had to be done properly and investigated thoroughly. As well as that, I was writing a response to you from the board. I have 13 board members, and I needed to make sure that they were aware about what I was writing, and I had their support. I admit, that did take time, and of course it would always be better to be able to get out quickly, but it's as important for me to get it right and to get it supported by the board.
If the BBC had responded quicker, do you think that the resignations might not have happened?
That's a hypothetical I can't answer. All I will say is that I think the resignation of the CEO of News was a very honourable act. I think it was right of her to take responsibility for an error in her division. As she herself said, the buck stops with me. And I said, in public life, it's rare to find people who accept that something went wrong in their own division and accept responsibility and take responsibility, and I applaud her for that.
Your culture and media editor, Katie Razzle, reported that Deborah Turnus became more and more angry and frustrated as the week went on because she was prevented by the board from putting out that apology. Was that in some way to blame for the fact that she then resigned from her post?
You would have to ask her. I've already repeated, I thought the apology that was on the table was necessary but not sufficient.
Did you try and stop her from resigning?
I spoke to Director General about it. The resignation or otherwise of the head of news is a matter for the Director General, not for the board or for the chair. My job is to test and challenge the Director General. It's an operational editorial matter, who he hires and who he doesn't hire underneath him.
And the Director General resigned as well. Did you try and stop him from resigning?
I did indeed, and I spent a great deal of time. I do not think the Director General should have resigned. I think that the act by the Director of News was an honourable and proper act. I think she took responsibility, for which I will again say I applaud her for doing so. I do not think that meant that the Director General had also had to resign. However, when you read the Director General's reason for resigning, certainly this was one factor, but he also says there were many other factors that led to that. I wish, and can I say the board wishes, that the Director General had not resigned. He had our full confidence throughout.
Sure.
Yes, Cam.
An organisation as large as the BBC, I would imagine it should have occurred to you that you could have put out an initial statement while you were still trying to get to grips with the gravity of what had happened prior to a full apology. Did you receive pressure from anybody else on that board to delay such an apology?
Absolutely not. What I would say, we did put out a full statement, which was, I think looking back, rather vanilla in its statement, as corporate BBC tends to do. And we did do it to hold, because I needed to put out a fuller statement, but I needed to be sure and I was right about what I was saying. This was a very, very important error, and I needed to make sure that what I was apologising for was fully sourced and fully right. It needed to be right, and it took its time.
The resignation of the Director General is quite a big deal, is it not? When you tried to dissuade Tim Davie from his resignation, how did that conversation go?
I don't think it is right for me to discuss private conversations with me and the Director General.
Well, it might be if the BBC is at stake.
Well, I think confidential statements, conversations need to remain confidential. But let me answer your question. I know Tim, and I've got to know Tim very well over the last 18 months. He is an outstanding Director General. He is extraordinarily good. His energy, his dedication, his commitment to the BBC cannot be gainsaid.
His commitment was broken.
Well, as you know in his statement, he felt responsible as Editor-in-Chief for the error. My view was the responsibility was taken by the Chief of News, and that was proportionate.
Thanks, Chair.
Can I just quickly take you back to the response to the committee's letter, November the 4th? You apologised on behalf of the BBC for the way that the Trump speech on the 6th of January were edited. Your words were, the BBC does accept the way that the speech was edited did give the impression of a direct call for violent action. The BBC would like to apologise for that error of judgment. Dr. Shah, I've had a look at the BBC editorial guidelines, section 3.4.25 of the BBC's editorial policy. That says, for news, factual and some factual entertainment content, unless clearly signalled to the audience or other reconstructions, content makers should not normally intercut shots and sequences if the resulting juxtaposition of material leads to a materially misleading impression of events. It seems quite clear to me that the way that both the Newsnight and Panorama edited this clip broke those BBC editorial guidelines. So what I'm just trying to get to grips with is why it took a year to apologise for this failing, despite the EGSC, which you chair, having concerns about this programme on 3 separate occasions, and why no action was taken despite the fact that there was a clear evidence of a breach of editorial guidelines.
As I said, in the January meeting, that report came out. I then invited the news division to give me a formal response to it. That response took place in May, and we discussed it then, and there was a different set of opinions around it. There was a plausible case that this edit, because the point of the programme was to deliver to the British audience, because it was about the supporters for President Trump and what they were learning. So there was a case for, as it were, the edit. This was discussed and debated, and there was a difference of opinion. I've already said we should have pursued it further at that time. And by pursuing it further, we should have investigated it in detail with the people responsible in the BBC to do that. You must remember, that is an operational matter and not a matter for, in governance terms, for the non-execs. But it is a matter which we could have pursued harder, is what I would say, and we should have done. Had we done so, then what you've just read out would have come out, and there would have been a formal response that this did breach that, and we would have then taken on
What was the tipping point that prompted your apology? Was it the 500 letters of complaint to the BBC? Was it the resignation of the Director General? Was it the memo?
No, straight away.
Wait a second. Yes. Or was it the threat of legal action from the President of the United States?
I'm sorry, say that again. The last one?
The threat of legal action from the President of the United States. What was the sort of tipping point in suddenly deciding that apology was forthcoming? The memo, the Director General going, the letters of complaint, or the threat of legal action from the President?
As I wrote to you, when the memo entered public discourse, there were a lot of complaints about it. And we decided at that moment to reflect and review the decision. And that's when we came out with the outcome that, yes, it was a mistake. It was an error of judgment, and that's what I wrote to you, and then later on.
Just to be clear, had this not have been covered by the memo and prompted all these letters of complaint, that would probably have never, it would never have come back, it would never have risen back to the surface.
It's worth noting that in when we discussed it, there had been no complaints to the BBC News about this. So there was no... If that had happened, we could have looked at it. As I said, again, there was a discussion at the board about this. And there was a debate, and because there had been no formal complaints, we let it rest. As you probably all know, very soon after that, I was uncomfortable with that outcome and that result, and I initiated. It wasn't the only reason. I had a number of things over the time I've been chair, which I worried about the workings of this committee, whether it was properly defined, whether the relationship with the board, with the main board, was precise enough, with the terms of reference with the advisors, whether the composition was good. And I invited Chris Saul in June to look again at it. Long before this broke, I did think there were things to be done, and that process was underway. One of those things, and maybe Caroline will talk about it, one of those things was, what is the mechanic when at a board, at a committee, there's disagreement within it? How do we deal with that? How do we deal with that in such a way that we don't cross that line between governance and editorial? It's an important line we hold, but it does seem to me that this is thrown up there. As I said, one of the issues I have to face is, what were the governance failures here? What were the process failures? And one of them is that. And I think we do need to find a way, and Caroline is going to be looking into that. I'd started it with Chris Saul. Chris Saul had some interim findings. We were underway. I should say, as you know, I listened intently to your conversation with Mr. Prescott. I met him several times during that period. I invited him to talk to Chris Saul, and they met to discuss it. After the letter went out, I talked to him again. After we met the board, I talked to him, and I said, I would like you to be engaged in fixing what's wrong with the EGSC, how we can get it to a state where you would not have cause to write such a letter again. I did that. He seemed to rise to it. So perfect. So we were going to carry on. Don't think this committee should think I ignored Mr. Prescott. I did not. I think he raised some important questions we need to answer. I've already said I don't think it was a rounded picture of what actually happened in the EGSC, and I think you've heard from your other witness that, in fact, the executive took many actions, detailed actions. So it wasn't just a case of a report coming out and a defensive reaction. That just is not an accurate account of what happened.
It was reported in the press quite a lot that the reason for the delay in the board responding to our letter, and indeed sort of opining in any way on what had happened, was because there was a big difference of opinion at board level. Is that true?
In May? Do you mean?
No, we're talking about recently in response to all the news that came out. You lost, two very key, very senior members of the BBC team, and then still we waited for you to say anything.
At the board meeting in October, when we discussed the memo, we discussed it at length, and there was a certain repeating of what happened in the EGSC, but it was important we discussed it, and there was some differences of opinion. But we did agree on the next step at that meeting, and the next step was for me to go back to Mr. Prescott, discuss his email to the board, and invite him to be part of reviewing how the EGSC could work better, to which he agreed. And then, as we know, A few days later, it was all over the papers.
Memo hit the papers, but that's not what I asked you. What I asked you is, there was this big delay between the newspapers covering this story and the board coming out with either a statement or a response to the letter that we wrote. And it's been reported in the press that the reason for that delay was because there was a big dispute within the board about how to respond. That there was, in some cases, people said chaos in the board. How true is that?
It was neither chaos nor that. The delay was, you wrote to me on the Tuesday, I replied to you on the Monday. That was the deadline you gave me. During that time, I wanted to investigate it, what went wrong, and get it right, and I needed to make sure the board were with me. And we discussed this. I don't think there was any chaos or difficulty there.
But I think, yes, if I could just add, because I was obviously part of some of those discussions, there was a continuing and sharp difference of opinion between certainly the chairman and me and some others on the board with the director of news about whether we were going to apologise just for the edit, or whether the impact of the edit and indeed the positioning of the Proud Boys material had given a misleading impression. We felt that it had, and the news continued to maintain that actually the impression given, despite the edit, was correct, because the gist of the speech by Trump had, for example, the use of the word fight 15 times and only talked about peace once. And they felt that the edit was justified, but it should have been a more transparent edit. We felt that the edit had led to a more profound problem. And indeed, your quotation of the editorial guidelines is absolutely right. We felt it violated them.
Thank you. Natasha?
Thanks so much for coming in today. So just to Robbie, kind of what is your view? What, in your view, took the board so long to publish a response?
I mean, there was definitely a difference of opinion, and it was properly outlined by Samir and Caroline. It all came down to whether, from my perspective, the point I was making, that there was a serious error, and simply having an identifiable edit and apologising for that would not be enough, because what mattered was what the meaning was. So on the one hand, you could argue that if you had a white flash that showed where the edit was, then that would be fine, and you apologise for not having the white flash. My view, and I think the editorial policy view, independent, is that if the meaning of the new constructed white flash edit, followed by the Proud Boys, gave the impression that it was a call to arms, it was a breach of editorial policy. That was my view. The discussions around that delayed the actual reply to this committee's letter, I was not involved in, but I was involved in the debate in the board, and this was the point I was making.
Just sort of in response to the memo in general, so there wasn't much kind of said publicly in response to it. What kind of how did we get to the point where we weren't really kind of responding to the points that were raised publicly for quite a long time?
You mean the response to the Michael Prescott's memo to the board?
In total?
Yes. Like publicly, we didn't hear anything about it until the leak. So why was there such a delay in kind of like a robust response to it?
Well, I suppose you would say the delay begins the moment it's leaked publicly. Let me make that separate from the response to the memo itself. When the memo came, and I spoke to Mr. Prescott about it, it went to the board. Accompanying that memo was a separate note which provided, in my view, a more rounded picture of all, which you heard in your early session, all the different issues that the EGSC have examined, and also, may I say, the actions taken, including some of the actions that Mr. Prescott appears to think no actions were taken, and that's simply not the case. We did take actions. Actions were you discussed at length the car insurance story. I find it interesting that was one that Mr. Press picked up. We didn't need the complaint. We ourselves, or the executives, may I say, discovered it, thought it was on, took it down within 6 days, and it featured as, I think, one of in the annual report as a serious editorial breach. I don't think you can actually argue the case that the executive did not do anything. I mean, that is just simply an unfair account of it. I think on many of the areas that he spoke in this letter, which, as you've all heard, was a partial account of what was actually done, all the various really important discussions we had in our thematic reviews about economy, about tax and spend, and about immigration and migration. Again, it's not the case that nobody in the BBC knows about this. Andrew Dilnott, who wrote the text, spent a long time after the report going around the newsroom explaining it. Madeleine Sumption did so. We are committed to learning the lessons. I mean, I was partly involved at the beginning on the migration one, so I know a bit about it. I know all the people I spoke to. And like all these reports, there are things that the BBC journalists do well, and there are things that can improve on. There were a number of recommendations. So I just think you mustn't get away with thinking that the EGSC is not a functioning committee that does take on board issues, dig deep into things, talks about more urgent matters, and the executive, on the whole, respond positively and constructively to it.
I just want to come back to the memo and the kind of leaking. Yes. So, Robbie, were you aware that it was going to leak?
Absolutely not, of course not.
So when you worked on the Sorority report, has the term that came out of that consistently was the culture of defensiveness in the BBC. Do you think that's changed since then?
I do think it's changed. I know that Tim Davey, the outgoing Director General, very passionate about that, and in relation to the press office, that there had been, I think, a computer says no default position and circling the wagons. I genuinely don't think that is the case anymore. I mean, of course, people are always naturally defensive when you're being criticised, but I think there has been a cultural change. Just want to say about the Prescott report more generally. I think there was a lot in the report that I think a lot of people at the BBC management agree with. It was basically copied in large part from the David Grossman report, but it was a snapshot in time, and this is crucial to your point. It is not that it was particularly unrepresented of the Grossman reports from the time, but a lot has happened since then, and we've had all the action plan which we can go through with you. And on the car insurance is a very good example. He feels very passionate about it. I know about this particular. So it took quite a while between his original email and when it was eventually properly discussed at EGSC. But once the committee had the full facts in front of it, as Samir was saying, it took only 6 days to deal with it.
Caroline, do you have anything to say around the kind of defensiveness within the BBC?
I think there's always a natural tendency to want to perhaps not be defensive but support your staff, particularly in journalism where of course there's a lot of people taking risks and really working under a lot of pressure. So I think amongst management, having been once a news manager myself, there's a natural tendency to think, hold on a minute, I need to sort of protect them. But actually the thing that strikes me, and I as you may know, I've recently come back to the BBC as a non-exec, having been an executive before, but having had a 15-year gap, is the extraordinary seriousness with which the BBC continually investigates itself and questions itself and reviews its output with a view to getting higher standards. I think that's the thing. The lack of understanding of that, I think, is the thing that most concerns me, because actually there are endless debates about when can you call something genocide and when don't you, and how where did we get it right and where did we get it wrong, for example. I think to characterise a support environment as a defensive environment is to mischaracterise it, actually.
And just to Sir Robbie, so you've clearly a man of very strong political convictions and have held multiple posts both at the BBC and then over at Number 10 for the last couple of decades. And how have you managed to keep these roles separate and managed your own bias, given that this is all about accusing the BBC of bias and accusing the BBC of not being able to look at its own lines? So how do you manage your own?
So I was Director of Communications for the government for 2 years, but I was a BBC news producer for 25 years, including being a programme editor and head of BBC Westminster. So I have a long track record. I primarily want to be defined as my commitment to the BBC, not my 2 years working for Theresa May. When I first joined, I think I joined the BBC in 1991, it was drummed into me about impartiality, and it's one of those things, those early impressions have basically dominated my thinking, and it's why I wanted to stick with the BBC. You're told to leave your politics at the door. And impartiality isn't just a sort of a moral obligation, it's also a legal obligation. I'll tell you one thing that's really, really important. If you want to find the people that are most critical of journalism when it becomes biased or inaccurate, it's other BBC journalists, because their reputations are damaged by it. And I think there couldn't be a bigger mismatch between the way I'm presented in some quarters in relation to my attitude. I think I've become weaponised in terms of how I'm perceived. Everyone who know me, I'm hugely impartial. I have friends across the political divide. I have impartiality through my bones, and I've always been a big campaigner.
I appreciate, but there is a question of sort of perception. Is it so? How do you manage perception? You said it's been weaponised, but I suppose it's difficult for people to separate those things.
Sure. One of the problems of being a non-exec member of the board is it's very, very hard to speak for yourself. You get calls from the journalists asking for a response, and you just don't want to engage. And that's one of the reasons I'm absolutely delighted to come here and give an opportunity to set out my case, where hopefully I can demonstrate that the perception is actually wrong.
Will you move on? Natasha?
Carry on. At the end of yours, whenever.
I've got a couple of... Cam, do you want to come in?
If that's all right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. So, Robbie, you talk about leaving your bias at the door. Shortly after you took over at the Jewish Chronicle, a second-generation columnist, Jonathan Friedman, resigned, stating that too often the Jewish Chronicle reads like a partisan ideological instrument, its judgments political rather than journalistic. How does that tally with your statement about leaving politics at the door?
Well, I think you got your timeline wrong. That particular statement happened after I had left. I left any involvement in the Jewish Chronicle in August 2024. A number of points I'd like to set out here is, firstly, I had no editorial role whatsoever on the Jewish Chronicle. It had no bearing whatsoever in my work with the BBC. My relationship with the Jewish Chronicle was fully declared. And Chair, if I had the opportunity to explain why I ended up being a non-Jewish person chairing or being a director of the Jewish Chronicle. The Jewish Chronicle is the oldest Jewish newspaper in the world, 200 years old. It was about to go under through liquidation. I was approached to join a consortium by an elderly Jewish fund person.
Remember his name?
Well, adventures, I will come to that. Philanthropist, and that's not his name. That's obviously his role. And it was his involvement and his funding of the Jewish Chronicle was conditioned on him not becoming a public person, because you can see more recently, but even then, the amount of the safety issues were very, very high indeed. So the original plan was for me to be director for like 2 weeks after we won. It ended up being a lot longer than that because there was complications in how charity law had changed. So I was doing a favour. I didn't get paid. Had no particular reason to be involved other than I was asked to do so. I had no involvement editorially whatsoever, and it's now for unfortunate reasons I ended up owning it or being director of it for much longer than I'd anticipated.
What was your role in the establishment of GB News?
After leaving Number 10 and before I joined the board, I was approached to help with a fundraise, and I helped with the fundraise, presenting what I thought my vision of GB News, which is somewhat different to the way it's turned out. But I never worked for GB News once it became a news channel.
Thank you.
Rupert, did you want to come in on
Thanks. Yeah, just off the back of the questions Natasha was asking. Good to meet the three of you. I think, Caroline, it's the first time Samir, I remember meeting at a party when you were at Juniper, and Robbie, I used to have your number. You used to phone me up for Daily Politics.
I know, we're
not as close as we used to be. How sad.
Very disappointed by that.
But Daily Politics was commissioned by Juniper, I think, was it? So I think you guys,
the programme you're confusing is when I was running Juniper, I made a programme for This Week with Andrew Neil, Michael Patillo, and Diane Abbott.
That's right. So you two probably knew each other way back.
Robbie Gibb was the commissioning editor of
at the BBC, the political programme. I remember, yes. And we all miss your brother. He was a very good schools minister, very responsive. Whenever we had school issues, we'd be up there at the department.
I think I could definitely agree with you.
You are. No. Look, my question. So, Robbie, congratulations on your knighthood. I think that's since we last spoke as well. So, congratulations on that. I guess prior to you taking up the role, your views on the BBC were quite out there in different newspaper articles you wrote. So there's the one from August 2020 in the Telegraph, I think, where you talk about how the BBC needs to get its ship in order. It says that BBC journalists are letting their preferences show. Even any student of impartial, inaccurate press can see this, and it includes a bit of an attack on Lewis Goodall in that article. Then there's a Daily Mail one about the Today programme the same year. Trapped by its own groupthink, it is radio misery, sneering and monstrously out of touch. Do you think that's still the case? That was 2020. You've been on the board since then. Do you still hold those views of the BBC?
Well, the particular issue around Today programme was that during I think it was the 2019 general election, it was unfortunate because I can see how it happened, is that they had outside broadcasts in universities up across, and they had a lot of. Unfortunately, the views expressed were not the views of that story. So the actual debate, that election, the debate was very much in red wall, and that created a real problem for them. But I understand why they did it. They wanted to get younger audiences participating. So I don't really see that from anymore in Today programme. They're taking a lot of their output out of central London now into different parts of the country, which is good. In terms of revealed preferences, I feel very, very strongly that you leave your politics at the door, and if you are tweeting, if you take the sum total of people's tweets, you take the sum total of their output, and you know where they're coming from, that is a problem. Because the BBC has to be for everyone. I know lots of BBC journalists. I know their politics because I've been around the BBC a long time. People from very much from the left. They are, you could not tell for one second. And you mentioned Lewis Goodall. I think Lewis Goodall is a very, very talented journalist. So much so, I was the person that recruited him into the BBC in the first place. And on the basis that he came from the IPPR. He was a talented guy, and I wanted to bring people with a diversity of opinion into the BBC. My issues are not particularly focusing on him, is that where people, and that's what I was writing about at the time before I joined the board, where journalists behave in a way which the public know where they're coming from. That is a real problem. One of the things, another credit to Tim Davie and his management of the BBC, introducing some very, very clear guidelines for Twitter, X, and you don't really see those stories anymore. I think the BBC have cracked it.
We've had people like Andrew Neil. I mean, there's always been people, and there's always been political appointments, haven't there? Gavin Davies and, I don't know, James Purnell. Lewis Goodall is still doing podcasts saying that you made his life hell. Why are people saying this? Why is Emily Maitlis writing an article that an active Tory party agent is shaping BBC News output? That's cuddly old you. Why
I think it mentions my name in that article, but look, I mean, I don't know why people write that. It's not for me to say, but perception is important, but not as important as reality.
And is it true that, I don't know, we hear there is a culture of fear. We hear there was the all-staff meeting last week. Many people felt very dismissed. Their questions were completely cut. And I think, Samir Shah, you said it was disrespectful of them to raise such issues.
I didn't say it was disrespectful of them. I was doing an all-staff meeting. I know that was dead. What I was trying to say is that, and we talked about
Sorry, by the way, I should have declared an interest. I was a former staff member at the BBC in the 90s. It was a long time ago, BBC Western
You
House.
mentioned, Robbie, and can I just say...
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
That,
So just
and you mentioned that I ran this
painted.
programme called This Week with Andrew Neil and Michael Patillo and Diane Abbott, Rachel, played by Alan Johnson. Every week I spoke to Robbie. He was the head of that department. And not one week did he ever play any politics. If anything, because of Andrew's and Michael's position, he was very keen that the other side, or the Lib Dems, also featured on the sofa. So if there was any push, it was always in the other direction because of the politics of those two. So I have absolute faith in Robbie. Robbie as a journalist, that's my experience of him. Obviously I wasn't involved in his recruitment of the board, but my experience of him was spent many years. So I think it is unfair to say that Robbie comes with, he's principally a journalist. He was a journalist running the whole BBC's political journalism, and he did that with great skill and great commitment to impartiality. That's my view about it. What I was talking about is that people, and I would say that the board of the BBC is full of really extremely experienced, very good people, and I think we should respect them. They're giving their time, they're giving their work on it, and that's what I was talking about. And as a whole, I don't like ad hominem attacks. I think we should look at what they say and the content of what they say, rather than it being a personal ad hominem point. And that's what I was saying. Saying, of course, staff, and people who know me, I go around talking to staff, and as you know, I have monthly lunches with junior staff to hear from them directly what they think of the BBC, and I get a lot of feedback. Staff are absolutely entitled to say what they want to say about me, but I think just in terms of ad hominem attacks, the individuals on my board are good people, they're experienced people, they say wise things, they challenge, as indeed are the executives, and I just want us to respect that.
We need to move on, Rupert, because otherwise we're going to run wildly out of time. Can I just very quickly ask Sir Robbie, there's been a lot of speculation in the media, including BBC journalists, who are saying that what's happened to the BBC over the last couple of weeks was a board-level orchestrated coup, if you like. Can you just address that for me now? You know, do you recognise that characteristic? Was there anything orchestrated about what's happened to the BBC over the last couple of weeks, the departure of Tim Davie, etc.?
It's up there as one of the most ridiculous charges. People had to find some angle. It's complete nonsense. It's also deeply offensive to fellow board members who are, as Samir was saying, are people of great standing in different fields. The idea that somehow I'm not even sure what the charge is, to be honest, and basically other than to say it's complete nonsense.
Caroline?
Yes, I certainly wouldn't have characterised anything I saw in the last couple of weeks as being a board coup.
Or any kind of orchestrated board level?
No, endless debate.
Okay.
but no orchestrated.
Let's go back to Natasha.
Sorry, can I just clarify something? Because you said that you weren't involved with, obviously, Robbie coming onto the board, but were you involved in helping, also not helping, but what was your role in Dr. Shah becoming chair? Was there any... Nothing? Okay, just clarifying, for me to know.
The chair is a public appointment.
Yeah, but I was just wondering, was there any conversations, were your views canvassed in any way? Were you asked your opinion on that?
When I applied for it, as I obviously know many people in the BBC, I've worked for it, I've been involved in it, and I did canvass, including Robbie and many others, whether they thought it was a good idea I applied for the job or not. I have to say, many thought it was, and I remember one, and I won't quote who it is, he said to me, he's a very senior BBC executive, he said, you know, it's one of those jobs, if you don't get it, you might be rather pleased.
You're feeling that way now.
Well, you know, I knew what he meant.
I was just wondering, just for process sort of understanding that. So over the weekend we had some reports of a resignation from the board. So Dr. Shah, why did Mr. Banerjee resign from the board?
I'm very pleased you asked me that question. So let me explain to you Sumit Banerjee's role in the board. He is one of our non-executive directors. He's a formidable man with a formidable intellect, and he's contributed enormously in the 4 years he's been on the board. He comes from I believe, a management consultancy, an internationalist commercial view. When its time came up for renewal, which he will be leaving the board in 4 weeks' time, I had a discussion with him in the summer saying that the skills I was looking for over the next few years, especially over charter and funding, were a different set of skills than the ones he possessed, and we would come to an agreement that after 4 years he has contributed extremely well to the BBC debate, but I'll be looking for someone else. Right now, that process of recruiting a new non-executive is underway, and I looked last week at the shortlist, which is a remarkably good, strong shortlist. Caroline is part of it, which is part of the nominations committee, which I chair, which will recruit this, and I was very heartened by this. So I was, and Sumit was going to leave. The letter came, private letter. The one thing I would say is that what has been picked up is that he was not consulted at that weekend when the resignations of our two most senior people, and there was a discussion. I look back because my memory was that he was. And I can tell the select committee that at 12:47 on that Sunday, I had a 26-minute call with Mr. Banerjee. So that was the weekend in which these things were discussed. I was responding to a request from Tim Davey because this was a very difficult moment. I said it's not a matter for a formal call for the board to discuss whether one of his executives should or should not be there. That's not matter. However, as a good chair, and because of the seriousness of which the events of that weekend, which led, and may I say, to the resignation of two very senior people, this is a very big event. So you would expect me to discuss with Neds, and I did, all of Neds, over that Saturday and Sunday, to hear what they had to say. Included in that discussion was, as I said, a 26-minute call to Mr. Banerjee. I know precisely because of the miracles of smartphone technology, I can scroll back and see it. So I'm both disappointed and surprised at what he had to say. He has a few weeks to run, and all I can say is I'm disappointed by that.
So I suppose if he's only got a few weeks to go to sort of leave now, feels like it's a bit of a statement in itself, the timing of it. So I'm just wondering, it's been reported that he's described it as being governance issues at the top of the BBC as one of the reasons that he's decided to leave. Was there any more detail around that?
He said it was a private letter to the board, so I will keep that privacy, but it was leaked in some way because one word came out, and I would simply say he was consulted.
Would we, as a committee, be able to see that letter privately, maybe?
Can I take away that question? I mean, obviously, I want to be as open and as frank with all of you, but it is a private letter, and let me reflect on that and decide how to deal with it.
There was reports today, I believe, in the Eye about a second board member who was on the verge of quitting, and there's also been reports of the role of the EGSC expanding and the creation of a new deputy general role. Dr. Shah, is this not sort of a bit of an admission that perhaps your leadership in this needs to be looked at as well, in terms of whether or not you're able to get a grip of what's happening on that board and if it's all working the way it should do?
You asked a number of questions there. I think on the business of the EGSC and how that should change, I've asked Caroline to do that, and maybe she can speak to the action she's taking and the answers that she will come up with for the board meeting in December. On your last point, no, I don't think that's right. I think right now my job is to steer the ship out of the shop into an even keel and make sure, and the most important job I have right now is to recruit a Director General. It is far and away the most important thing I need to do.
Would it help I'm a senior independent director, so one of my jobs obviously is to liaise with the other non-exec directors and I should tell you that that Samir has the unanimous support of the board, and that was established at the beginning of what you might call the current crisis, so about a week ago, and was repeated on Friday night. We are very lucky to have him as chairman. And
okay. But there are issues here, aren't there? We're looking now at changing how this all works, and it's taken quite some time to get there. So that was why I asked the question.
Of course, it's completely reasonable. Sorry, completely right question to ask. Sorry, but
and then to wrap up before I think one of my colleagues kind of jump in. So where do we go from here then? What's the next steps for the board?
Well, we are united on the steps that need to be taken. I think, let me put them in three categories. The first is we need to examine the editorial failures and take actions, and part of that is to do with examining. We already know one outcome of that, which I think is very serious, and that's the resignation of our head of news, which I think is, as I repeated, was an important, the right thing to do. She took responsibility. On the governance issue, at the heart of which is the EGSC, Caroline will be coming back to the board with answers. And specifically on the memo that Mr. Prescott Peter Johnson, one of our head of complaints, will be looking in detail with every single point, asking whether the actions we have taken or actions the management have taken are good enough, and are there more actions to be needed. So that will all come back over the next day. At the same time, I have with my nominations committee and the board, secure a new Director General.
Can I just ask you a very quick question, Dr. Shah? You suggested, in answer to questions to Natasha, that letter from Dr. Banerjee may have leaked, and also we know that the memo leaked. You've got a bit of a problem with leaks in the BBC at the moment. Do you know how did the letter, but also more specifically the memo, how did that find its way to the Telegraph? Have you managed to get to the bottom of that? I
have instituted a leak inquiry. We are a journalistic operation, and it doesn't surprise me that we leak, but these were two very serious leaks. They were both, as you heard from Mr. Prescott, he had no intention for it to go out. I don't believe that Mr. Banerjee, in his note, also did not expect to make the news, if I quote him properly. But I do think we should have a leak inquiry, and I've initiated that.
Caroline Thomson, are you a faithful or a traitor?
I was just, there was a wry smile from me, because actually at one level you could say this is a test of what very good journalists we employ, that they manage to get the stories.
Let's move on to Liz, please.
Thank you, Chair. If I can ask Sir Robbie, do you agree with Deborah Turness's statement that recent allegations that the BBC is institutionally biased are wrong?
I do agree with her, yes. And if I could expand, if that's okay. The reason I would never use that, because it implies that all BBC journalists are biased, which I absolutely don't believe that. I mean, you could trot through some, Gary O'Donoghue's fantastic reporting of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, fantastic. Quentin Somerville, and a person, the unsung hero of covering politics, Chris Mason. They're absolutely first rate, and anything that would impeach their impartiality would be wrong. It's also worth noting, with regard to Michael Prescott's memo, there was nothing on BBC Westminster or Millbank, nothing on BBC Northern Ireland, and there's a reason for that, because those particular areas, and other areas as well, are centres of excellence. They have a lot of scrutiny on a daily basis. They can make mistakes, we all make mistakes, but they correct it very, very quickly. So the reason I agree with Deborah in relation to that, it's we do have some issues, underlying issues in some areas which the BBC have held their hands up to and are addressing, but to tar the entire BBC with that brush would be completely inappropriate.
And were you sorry that Deborah resigned?
I was disappointed that we ended up in this situation, that she ended up resigning, but it's, as a non-exec member, it's not for me to comment on exec members of Tim's team.
There have been 3 resignations in the fallout from the publication of the dossier. There's an argument that if you're a journalist, and you were a journalist for over 25 years, the last thing you want is to become the story. Given the reports of your attempts to shape editorial judgments, and the persistent questions about whether your political views have influenced BBC decision making, how can the public maintain trust in the BBC's impartiality under your oversight? And in light of these conflicts, have you considered resigning?
There's a lot in that question. If I can be as brief as I can, I'm a non-exec director. I have no involvement in pre-broadcast content. I have no involvement, and rightly so, in operational matters. There's been lots of stories that are just completely untrue about me in relation to influencing the day-to-day output. In Tim Davies' leaving note, he talked about these issues being weaponised by people. I think he was particularly referring to people that have latched onto the issues in the Prescott memo, the errors, and are using it to bash the BBC. And it's often people who don't agree with the BBC for a whole range of ideological reasons. It's also been politicised in the other way, as a way to have a pop at me. There's something illegitimate, making my role as if I'm not legitimate. Actually, the most people, his response to the memo, who are critical, want the BBC to do better. And I think, so yes, I think it has been weaponised, and I've been a victim of that weaponisation. But broadly speaking, I think most people want the BBC to do well, and parking those two particular extremes. So in answer to your question, no, I don't see, I've not done anything wrong. I'm a passionate defender of the BBC. I'm a passionate defender of its values, the licence fee. I was involved in a minor way in helping James Burnell in the last charter renewal. So everything I've done throughout my entire time at the BBC has been to help and to promote the BBC.
You have no intention of resigning?
Correct.
Dr. Shah, as we just heard, Tim Davies said of the BBC, we should champion it, not weaponise it. Do you feel like the BBC is being weaponised?
So I've been involved in the BBC for many decades. I used to work for the BBC when I ran the current affairs department, and then I was on the board, and then I made programmes for it. It is, whenever the BBC makes a mistake, and I think you asked the question, I don't think it's enough to say 99% of the time we get it right. I think when we make a mistake, it's an important thing. We need to identify the problem and take the correct actions. It's not enough to say, well, everything else is great. It's important you hold out to high standards. But when we do make a mistake, what tends to happen, has happened over the years, is that people who want to have a go at the BBC use it to have a go at the BBC. And I said at the beginning here, I apologise for the people who care deeply for the BBC and want it to survive and thrive. And most people do. I do think that when these situations rise, there is a kind of firestorm around it, and people use it as a way of criticising the BBC for the mistake they made. We've always made mistakes, and when we do, the right thing to do is to own up to it, fix it, and to your point, act quickly. I think one of the things I'm going to learn from these 3 weeks is we do need to find out and examine why does it take so long. I don't think there's any malice here in taking long, and I don't think it is about a sclerotic organisation. I think, but we do need to understand why it takes so long and try and fix that as well. It's important we do, because the longer it takes, the more it becomes a political football to be kicked around with. So it is, to me, one of the lessons there. Editorial, their governance, and then there's this issue of speed of response. It's an important thing. It matters that we are just quicker and get on the front foot.
Thanks, Liz. Dr. Shah, your colleague, Sir Robbie, is coming for quite a lot of stick in the media, as you're probably aware, for somehow influence, wielding his right-wing bias to influence the board, albeit, I mean, looking at the recent YouGov figures, it shows that 31% of people think the BBC is biased in favour of left-wing views, compared to 19% who think it's biased.
31% in favour of left-wing views?
Yes, 31% say it's biased in favour of left-wing views, 19% in favour of right-wing views, and the number that think it's in favour of left-wing views is actually going up. So if he is wielding his right-wing bias, he's not doing it very well. But leave that to one side. What's your view? Is Sir Robbie overly politically biased in his discussions with the board?
No, he's not. And my account of my dealings with Robbie when he was my commissioner, he's interested in impartiality and accuracy. And I do think that when he brings to the table, and he feels very strongly about it, the stories, the issues he raises, look at the substance of it. The substance of it is about being accurate and fair. Not often discussed, and maybe Sir Robbie will talk about it himself. There was an issue about a rail strike where, Robbie, why don't you explain that?
Yes, I am, conscious of, the perception of my bias. I'm always on the lookout for biases the other way to make sure that I can, demonstrate what I say. And I saw a story before last Christmas. It was a train strike, and the whole story, it was a regional journalist. It was the whole notion of the train strike was how inconvenient it was to passengers, and it was very, very dismissive, verging on the critical of the union striking. And so I spotted this. It clearly, from my perspective, lacked the union voice, either in tracking or in clip. I raised it, sent it to the head of BBC England and copied in EGSC, and it was agreed that was the case. And the journalist was spoken to, and he totally agreed, and that was good. One of the sorry.
No. Are you responsible then in that case for the fact that YouGov found that 31% of people feel that the BBC is biased in favour of left-wing views?
So, look, I mean, this is the thing. I know it's hard to marry the fact that I spent 2 years as a director of communications for the government, not because of the government, and my genuine passion for impartiality. I want to hear the full range of views. I mentioned the recruiting of Lewis Goodall. I don't want the BBC to be partisan or favour any particular way. When you tune in, I want to know what is happening.
Let me answer that question. I don't think that the way we address our issues are helpfully characterised as left-wing or right-wing. We examine things. Say, for example, which was not mentioned, we cover business coverage or the migration report. And there are issues we find that we're strong in some cases and we need to get better in others. I think the question is about, are we impartial? Are we covering all sides of the argument? Are we making sure that we are not showing any revealed preferences? That's what it's about. I think, I just don't think of it. Is this a left-wing position? Take, for example, our discussion, as we do, which is a very important, in this time frame, the January to May, every 5 years, the BBC reviews its editorial guidelines. It's the most important document we have to make sure that every 5 years, it came to the editorial, the EGSC, for rigorous examination. It then goes normal process to the board. We did that with great, and people discussed it. Even we discussed what is our position on the use of the word terrorist. So it's not just a simple, let's pass it. These are really important questions. These were debated. It was, again, a very strong, very helpful, very constructive debate. And that's how it works. I like differences of opinion. I like diversity of opinion. The worst thing for us is to have groupthink. We want to challenge, we want to doubt. That's what's important. And it's important we have points of view representing, frankly, the country as a whole.
Okay, cool. Rupert?
Yeah, I don't think it's just the 2 years at the Conservative Party, though. Did you not work on the Portillo leadership campaign? Because I think what's interesting is you've gone in and out, back and forth, whereas other people usually make the break, go to one or the other.
Sure, but I spent 25 years at the BBC. That's the important thing. I have been defined by these 2 years at Number 10.
You have also worked. I
have worked for the Conservative Party.
The Portillo campaign. You worked for Francis Maud. So it's not just 2 years isolated.
No, but my point.
Anyway, look, that's. Oh, sorry.
But just for clarity, I was talking about how I've been defined. I'm not saying I haven't had any other political involvement in my history. I am 61, so there's a lot of time to fill.
So the EGSC, just wanted to ask, it's got a few holes in it now, right? Because of these resignations.
No, it's the board.
Oh, is this to me?
EGSC, or whoever wants to answer the EGSC questions.
Mr. Banerjee was not a member of the EGSC, he was a member of the board.
But,
and there's no hole there because
the two, Tim Davey and Deborah Tyner's were, weren't they?
Well, that will be part of course, Caroline's examination of the composition of the EGSC. So maybe you would like to speak to that.
For the moment, Tim Davey is still Director General, so he would still be a member of the EGSC and come to the meetings. Jonathan Munro is the acting Director of News, so he will come in replacement for Deborah. Okay. So we don't have holes at the moment, but what the Chairman has asked me to do is do a root and branch review of EGSC, which I'm doing at speed and at pace at the moment, and one of the things we will look at is the membership.
It does seem a very small number of people to be arbiter of editorial standards, and including someone who is known for their conservative past and being a bit partisan. I just wondered, I've seen the minutes of the 6th of March 2025, and there's actually an agenda item. Actually, it deals with the BBC Arabic issue, so I do agree with what was said by you, Samir Shah, in your letter, that some of the things in the Prescott memo were dealt with, so I don't know why they're in there still making hay, including BBC Arabic. However, plan for reform voters.
And for
reform voters. So there's a whole item in there about how there needs to be trust built with the reform electorate. Is there not going to be something similar planned for green voters? Those are going up as well in opinion polls. It does seem very slanted when you look at panel shows that there always seems to be Zia Youssef on it or Nigel Farage. This is a party with 4 MPs.
Yeah.
Why plan?
I'm happy to.
I'm happy to take it, but Robbie, why don't you start? And I'll come in on it.
So there's 2 issues there, both of great interest. So that particular meeting, Deborah Tyner did a presentation on party support for the BBC, and it was a discussion by voting. There's a number of things, but then Labour very, very supportive, and then there was concern about why is it that reform voters didn't support. They had, hostility to the BBC. And she had various thoughts that was absolutely not about doing stories that are favourable to reform, because that's how it could come across. One of her ideas was having more live discussion programmes in all. So that was what that was about. You look sceptical. So that was that. The second issue is something that's very close to my heart, is the issue about allocation of airtime to different political parties. And there's a general sort of metrics for doing it, is that you look at past and present levels of support over 2 electoral cycles as making a judgment. And the particular problem at the moment, of course, is that you've got, for example, Reform leading in the polls, but very, very few seats. You've got Liberal Democrats further down the poll with many more seats. You've got the Greens, as you pointed out, in second in some polls. And you've got the government, in a much lower percentage, but they are the government, and you've got the leader, the official opposition struggling on but less than 20%, but still the official opposition. It is the exec are massively alert to this, and we have updates at every EGSC on this very, very subject.
May I answer that? And let me step back a bit. One of the jobs of the BBC and its news division is to reflect the points of view across the country, that we are properly impartial, and we hear that. In establishing where we may be weak or where we are strong, we do a lot of research. We do a lot of research on various demographics. We want to, for example, we need to make sure levels of trust are just as high amongst young people as it is amongst old people. And this is normal business. We look at how the country responds and to trusting the BBC.
Just the reform voters, why not?
And what we discovered when we did the political analysis, it's among lots of, we do demographic analysis, we do geographic analysis. One of the things about geography, which I'm very exercised by, is that support for the BBC declines as you go further north. This is a very, very big issue for the BBC. We are across the country, and it's made one of my strategic priorities is we've moved programmes and production out. We need to move power out of London, and that will help establish better trust as we go further north. So it's not surprising that the news division examines itself.
It is surprising to the millions of licence fee payers that reform seems to be on so frequently. There's a plan for reform voters. There doesn't seem to be a plan for other parties.
We had a plan for how to reach young people, and how do we do that? And that's not just about content, it's also about the platforms.
Over some of the ones I asked Michael Prescott, just to get the other side of it, was there any discussion of the dossier with him before, or even the appointment at all?
What?
Yeah, with yourself, because you're friends, we've established now.
I don't think I had any conversation. I know him, and I've got to know him a lot better since he's joined, but there was no conversation with him prior to his appointment. And in terms of the only contact I had with him, I've not met him in person since Sorry, go on.
Yeah, in the run-up to the job. I think I asked him in the run-up to being appointed.
Nothing run-up to the job
and
at all.
Since the dossier.
Nothing in the run-up to the job. It's quite a long time ago, but I'm 99% certain that no contact. And in relation to the dossier, I phoned him about a week, coincidentally, prior to him sending his dossier, just checking in. I hadn't seen him or spoken to him since while I was walking along. And he actually asked me, or he told me he was thinking of sending a note to Samir as chair about his concerns about his time on EGSC, and did I think it was a good idea? And I thought, well, fair enough. If you want to do that, that's fair enough. But then I think I then phoned you, Samir, and mentioned this to you, if you recall, and I think to check had it arrived. And the next thing I found was this whole dossier in my inbox as a member of the board. So something happened between him saying to me he was thinking of writing to Samir as chair, and him deciding to send to the whole board.
And just lastly, I mean, some of the things in there, the Gaza coverage, for example, it would have surprised many that he saw the BBC position as what it was, because we get email, and again, Tim Davey in that chair used to always say we get complaints from both sides. So, again, has the EGSC ever considered the Centre for Media Monitoring report? That was a 188-page systematic look at every mention of Gaza, and I think they found that the equivalent number of deaths, IDF death, did not amounted to many thousands of Gazan deaths. I just wondered, I mean, because his thing seems so partial, and I don't think he really allayed that fear that it was all from one perspective. Would the EGSC ever consider left-wing type perspectives?
We've never looked at other people's reports in that sense. What we would do is look at particular concerns about accuracy, particularly. I've been interested. You've said quite a lot.
Poverty or climate change, or any of
so you have raised an issue which I was interested in, about the dehumanising way in which the language used. I think I'm right in saying for about Palestinian casualties, and issues around the reporting of how we describe Benjamin Netanyahu. I think that's interesting in terms of the language used for the Palestinian casualties, which I think I'm not unsympathetic to what you're saying. There's a type of research that you use called sentiment analysis, which uses AI to make a proper assessment. And what I would say is that it's definitely the kind of thing I would like to see us digging quite deeply into when we do the thematic review into the Middle East. The trouble with that type of analysis, it's not very well respected and regarded, and so it's much easier and more pressing to do things about accuracy where you can really nail it. But I mean, you get me wrong. I am sympathetic to you in relation to those concerns being addressed.
I would say listen to your staff more, all those all staff meetings, all those letters with 400 signatories, not just one person every time.
Thank you, Rupert. Let's have Damien, please.
Thank you, Caroline. Dr. Shah, you came back a few moments ago to what I think is a central issue here, which is the speed of response. So I'm old enough to remember 2007, before your time leading the organisation, but when the BBC was in hot water over the misnaming of a kitten.
Oh, yes.
You do get held to a higher standard. That comes with the privilege of the licence fee. But on that occasion, it also took over a year and a leak for it to come out. So it's kind of all very well to say, well, we must just do better at coming out faster. But what is going to make the BBC face up and fess up faster?
I think that's such an important question. And I understand the scepticism that it always seems to take time. I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm heartened by one other area. It's a parallel area which I was involved in. I took very great care to accept, which was what we call the culture review, where in my first year I was determined to tackle abuses of power. And there was a lot of, we do this year in, year out, it's always happened. And there was some skepticism. But in the event, we did a very strong review. We came out earlier this year, and I and the board, but I took personal ownership of trying to get this right in the face of skepticism. And I would say that the executive responded extremely well. There's a very serious set of actions that are in place now to tackle it. So, whilst I agree...
I'm going to have to rush you.
No, but what I would say is that I think I will equally, once I focus on it, say, what is the problem here? Why do we not come out more quickly? What is it that stops us, and how can we fix it? It's going to be absolutely one of the lessons I've learned of this particular 3 weeks. I do hear your skepticism because, I remember that kitten story.
Socks, in case you're just delving deep. Socks and cookie.
Yeah. And so I think it's important, and I think it is a constant problem for the BBC that we do respond in a way that always puts us on the back foot. And I don't like that. I want us to be on the front foot and get out our statements clearly. If we made a mistake, hold our hands up fast. If we don't think it's a mistake, say that.
So returning to the backward-looking thing,
yes.
So what is in the Prescott memo? So the board is committed to revisit everything that's in that memo and to report back on them, on those items transparently about your conclusions. What does that mean in practice, and what is the transparency we should be looking out for?
Well, what I've asked Peter Johnson to do is to examine every single story and set out what actions we've taken, or the executive have taken, to deal with that. Then analyse whether those actions are adequate and whether more actions need to be taken. So be very precise to every single point. It may be that we'll find, for example, in my view, about the insurance thing, the action was taken and that's it, and we don't need to do any more. But there will be others where we think, Peter Johnson may think, well, these are the actions taken, A, B, C, but we now need to do D and E as well. So it's going to be very precise, and we're going to...
Earlier this afternoon, Mr. Prescott said to us that you should treat all the issues he's raised as systemic unless and until they are demonstrated to be otherwise. Do you think that is a correct way to go about that analysis that you're talking about?
Well, I should say I'm not clear what Mr. Prescott means by the word systemic.
Let me put, he's not here for me to put words in his mouth
but tell me.
In present, but I think what he means is, rather than saying it was a one-off, something went wrong on that Tuesday in March, somebody made an error, that there's something in the organisation, whether it's in the culture, the systems, the processes. I think that's probably what he means by systemic.
Let me talk about how I read those series of points that Mr. Prescott.
You do it concisely.
Yes, okay. So I think there were some individual errors, but I also think it points to some underlying problems. That's how I would describe them. For example, an underlying problem in the Arabic service.
Forgive me, so the question is, do you think it's a reasonable approach to this exercise that is about to be undertaken to start with the assumption that for each of those items it may have been systemic, we have to demonstrate it's not?
I wouldn't frame it in that way. I would ask Peter Johnson to look at each one on its own merits and examine. He's a very fine, very seasoned and experienced journalist, to look at each one and come to the board with an analysis of whether this is an individual error or a underlying problem error or it's a systemic error.
Thank you. And just finally from me, Sir Robbie, could you just say to the committee what you think it should be the future for the BBC, what role it should play in the next 10 years, which may be the same or different from in the past 10 or 20 or 30 years?
A nice open question. One of the things I do agree with Michael Prescott is the potential for the BBC. You know, in the world of totally dividing channels from Fox to and all the rest of it and the internet, we have a brand, we have a DNA that could actually just lead the way, not just in the UK but globally. That is the thing I find most exciting. I think we've still got a huge opportunity to do that. And so in 10 years, yeah, I think that we could do that in 10 years.
Thank you, Damien. Bio, please.
Thank you. Just on that last point, in the previous panel, Michael Prescott, you mentioned that he called you and sort of ran it by you effectively with regards to...
No, I called him this is before
regarding the memo.
Yeah, I called him a week prior, so it wasn't that way round.
Okay.
Just checking in because I've not spoken to him since he left.
Yeah.
And in that he said he was thinking about, or had done, I couldn't quite remember, message the chairman. That was it wasn't anything else about the memo.
Okay. And so do you sort of feel from that question he felt that it could be damaging to the organisation? No, the fact that he checked.
He didn't check. I phoned him and he said, he's thinking of sending a memo.
But you phoned him, but he brought up the issue that he was going to send it.
Yeah, because that was our primary connection was via the EGSC, and it was not an reason. He must have just been writing his memo then. That's all I can assume. It was a very, very fleeting.
But when you called him, did you know he was going to be preparing this memo?
No, not at all. No, I phoned him to check in. I hadn't spoken to him since he had left the EGSC as an advisor. He must just crossed my mind.
So he brought it up. I mean, look, I say this obviously because, you know, there's an element of perception the chair was talking about earlier as well. I think that, you know, there is a scenario where, imagine if Keir Starmer sort of recruited Alistair Campbell. There is that perception that is important here, and so that's why we're asking some of the questions that we're asking.
I totally get, and I hope I was trying to make the distinction between. Well, firstly, I was never as good a communications person as Alistair Campbell, but I only did it for 2 years.
That was good. I like it.
But I did, unlike him, I did 25 years as a BBC journalist. So my whole DNA is very different to his. I'm an impartial BBC journalist, not a spin doctor by nature.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is, has the experience of Mr. Prescott's memo where he felt the EGSC was not acting, so he escalated to the BBC board and altered your thinking on how the EGSC interacts with the board. So what do you want the SOAR review to achieve?
Would you like me to...
Actually, no.
So the review I'm doing is I've been given carte blanche by the chairman to really look root and branch at how EGSC is operating. I think what EGSC as it currently operates has many strengths. You've heard us mention, for example, the thematic reviews have been really useful. But it's perhaps turned a bit into a bit too much of a debating chamber as opposed to probably needing something that's more akin to an audit function. So something that's more into tracking actions. I think this is a point that will resonate with some of the conversation we've been having today with you. Looking at the organiser of it, should they have a dotted line to the chair, the non-exec chair, so that you have a line of accountability there. And also the other thing that would resonate with what we've been discussing this afternoon is the way that the EGSC reports to the main board. I think one of the conclusions we're reaching is that, for example, on the Arabic service, one of the problems was a lot of action was taken, but no one communicated the action. So the EGSC didn't know and the board didn't know. And actually tracking through actions properly so we can check they've happened, but also making sure that everyone knows they've happened and can see the results is one of the important things we'll probably do.
Okay. Thank you, Caroline. This question is to yourself, Dr. Shah. The EGSC used to be chaired by Nicholas Sirota, who was the Senior Independent Director. Why is the chair of the BBC board chairing the EGSC?
Yes, I think the issue of whether I, as the chair of the board, should also chair the EGSC is one that I would like Caroline to examine. As I said, nothing is off the table here. I think it's important we get this right, and I'm perfectly happy to take what recommendations she makes to the board and the board's outcomes of those recommendations. And being the chair of the EGSC will be part of that.
Okay, and I know that you've mentioned that you're looking to change the composition as well of the EGSC. So what will it look like?
Maybe Caroline should... I think
it will still have a mix of execs and non-execs, I think. I mean, I should say I'm speculating to you before I've been to the board with the conclusions. So, they may, subject to the board agreeing them. I think it should have a broad representation of views as far as possible from within that. And we should still have independent advisors. But we might look at the role and how we define the job descriptions of the independent advisors. The two independent advisors you've seen today have their contracts already finished, so we need to reappoint them.
My final question to Dr. Shah. Were board members excluded from conversations on the Director General going?
On the Director General going?
Yes.
I don't exclude board members. I mean, you're talking about that weekend, yes. Where I spent the weekend talking to every single NED about the situation, and I wanted to hear what they had to say. When we had a board meeting in the late Sunday afternoon, the Director of News had resigned, and the Director General resigned. So we didn't have a board meeting to discuss. Well, first of all, it is not our position to discuss whether or not an executive working for the Director General is a matter for the board. It is not. It's a matter for the Director General.
Actually, just before you carry on with your answer, I say that because as the chair, there's a strong relationship that you have with the DG, yes. Director General. And so there's an element of protecting and supporting the Director General. So what I'm trying to get at is what happened there in terms of protection of a relationship that's very strong that obviously failed.
Yes. Let me repeat. I think the Director General, Tim Davey, has done an outstanding job as Director General, and I'm very sorry to lose him. Let me be clear. And it's not just me, the whole board, and I know that because I've spoken to them all, one-to-one, that he had the full confidence of the board and they wanted him to continue. No question. Tim knew that, and in his resignation, you will see his reasons for resigning, but I'll make it absolutely clear that neither I as chair or the board wanted him to go. He had our full confidence, and we would have liked him to stay.
Okay, with him going, did you think about your position?
My position? Yeah. My job now is to steady the ship and put it on an even keel. I'm not somebody who walks away from a problem. I think my job is now to fix it, and that's what I'm doing. And I want to lead the organisation in such a way to address the issues we've raised, which are editorial, governance, and the issue of speed, and to fix that and lead what is really important here, the search for a new Director General.
Thank you.
Dr. Shah, there's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of weeks all across the media as to whether actually the job of a DG is just too big for one person to do and whether that role should be split down. Now, before you'll have seen we spoke to Michael and Caroline. They both thought that it was and that it should be split. They had different views about how that should happen. Michael thought that it should be an editor-in-chief alongside a sort of chief executive in a business sense, if you like, whereas Caroline thought there should be a for the other Caroline, thought there should be a Director General and then a Deputy Director General. And that's been what's been reported in The Guardian, suggesting that might happen. Have you got a preference in that sense? Do you think the job's too big for one person? Should it be split down? How should it be split?
It's a very important question, and my view is that it is too big for one person. My view is that as we search for the new Director General, in that lens by which we search for that Director General, I should make it clear, and the Noms Committee should make it clear, that there should be a Deputy Director General who's laser focused on journalism. Journalism is the most important thing and our greatest vulnerability. And I remember when I first started, I think it was mentioned, when I first started as Head of Current Affairs, John Bird was Deputy Director General and his focus was journalism. That did not mean that the DG was not Editor-in-Chief. We mentioned later on, more recently, Mark Thomson was the Director General. He was also the Editor-in-Chief. And even though Mark Thomson was a journalist by trade, he still felt the need to have a Deputy Director General, Mark Byford, in charge of journalism. That was then. Now, it seems to me it's even more important because the nature of news has changed. The importance, that, as Robbie mentioned, that this is an opportunity. The BBC needs to be the beacon of impartial journalism. It absolutely does. We are living in a world in the next 10 years where people need to trust us and we need to have a focus that our journalism is good. And I think that needs that. So I'm inclined to restructure the executive in the future, once we get a new director, that the lens through which we examine potential candidates for the Director General includes the idea that there will be a Deputy Director General who will be focused on journalism.
Thank you, Damien.
So, having a Director General and a Deputy Director General, the hierarchy couldn't be clearer. Did you think about doing it a different way, where you have a Chief Executive who runs the organisation and a, whatever you call them, Editor-in-Chief, who is ultimately accountable for content, and they both report into the board?
I think that's an interesting observation, but obviously the Charter at the moment does not allow that. In the Charter, the Director General...
It's going to get renewed quite
yes.
soon.
Well, I think, as I said, it's a good moment for discussion, but right now, I have to replace the Director General, right now. And I have to replace it within the terms of the Charter. And the Charter allows that. I think the point you raise is worth raising, and we, as with many issues, we will be talking about the Charter. There are many factors about the Charter that we need to discuss and engage in, and we need to start that conversation.
Well, here you are in Parliament. It is an opportunity to express your views in any way you like. Well, so you're constrained by the current Charter. Were you unconstrained, would you take a different view?
Well, right now, my view, and I recall that the Chair would like me to take a position, I think that the idea of a DG and a DDG has worked well, and I can see it working again. I will need to be persuaded that the alternative one is a better solution.
Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. Jeff?
Okay, thanks. That's the executive. Can we talk briefly about the board? So what do you want to do about changing the composition of the board? Particularly, would you want to change the number of non-exec board members?
Well, again, a matter for the Charter, and I've already said I'm looking forward to some constitutional innovation about the board. By that, I mean, I think we do need to take a look at the composition of the board, the flexibility there is, in the nature of the public appointments, how many public appointments there are. All of it should be a matter for discussion.
Do you have a view?
I do have a view. I would like, as the Chair, to have greater flexibility. At the moment, I have 10 non-execs and 4 execs. 14, that's it, rigid. And given the state of the way the world is changing and the kind of skills and experiences we need on the board, I would like greater flexibility to reshape the board to make it better able with the experiences to the world that's coming forward. We talked earlier about the impact of AI on journalism and the whole point about AI. If it's important now, can you imagine how important it'll be in 5 years' time? If I find that the board does not have enough expertise in that area. I'd like to be able to change that.
Okay, and can I ask about political appointees? Do you think it's right that do you think it's important to have political appointees to the board? I can ask all three of you that question, actually.
Well, I'm sorry, what did you say at the end?
Well, is it important? Is it right for there to be political appointees?
Let me be clear, they're public appointments, not political appointments. Just be clear, there's a process.
About politicians.
You apply. And I think we should look at this. I think it's important. And the issue here, for me, is independence versus accountability. We need to be independent, but it's also important that we are accountable to the public, to Parliament, and the nations. The 4 public appointments are to the 4 nations. England, I don't need to spell them out. I think it's important the nations are represented on the board of the BBC. How that mechanic is, I think we can discuss it and we should make it clear.
Could those nations be the contributions be provided by somebody with journalistic experience, not appointed by the government?
I'm sorry, what, of the nations?
Yeah.
Well, I've given you my point about the executive. I think the Deputy Director General should be there. I think journalism is a good skill to have, but there are many things. The BBC is a very, very big organisation, does many, many things. And I think whilst journalism is a very important part, my vision of that is that the DDG, who will be on the board, will be focused on that. The 10 non-executives, it needs to be accountable as well as independent. So I do see a role for people who represent the nations, because that's part of it. But how that happens, we can discuss it. And of course, as you know, I've left out the other public appointment, that is the chair, and I think the chair should be in that mix as well.
Thank you very much. Can I ask just one question on that? When you appeared in front of our predecessor committee,
yes,
at your pre-appointment hearing, you were asked whether you felt that it was acceptable that members of your board should be permitted to be members of a political party, and at that point you weren't able to give us a definitive answer. You weren't sure. Do you know now?
The answer is you can be a member of a political party. As it happens, Sir Robbie was not, is not. We've had many people, even the chair, we will remember, was a member. Sometimes politicians are, and they're members of parties. The real thing is to have diversity of opinion, and there are party politics are left out, and we examine the point of it.
Just super quick follow-up, not opinion one, but just on, if we're reforming the board, is there not an argument for having staff appointments on there? Because if you look at AFP in France and NPR, a number of those positions are reserved for, Robbie, you've done journalism, but I think your current board, if you look at it, it looks like it could be the post office board. There's a lot of people from business. So people who've made those hardened decisions, maybe even the foreign correspondents who've had to make quick decisions when, you know, people are trying to weaponise things. Some of those people would be good on your board, some actual staff. What do you think?
You make a very, very good point. I was hoping, because of events, I haven't been able to make a speech about the BBC and its accountability and how we can make it more accountable. We have mechanisms to be accountable, as this is to Parliament, to the government today, but I'm concerned about how accountable we are to the public and the licence fee payer.
Also, having a board,
and
do you know what I mean, of people who've done it.
Part of that accountability is, again, to do with the membership of the main board.
And last but not least, Vicky.
We all know that staff morale is really important. So how does the board assess current levels of staff confidence in the BBC leadership, given leadership transitions and the charter review? And then on that point, do we know when the charter renewal may be taking place? And will it potentially have to wait until the Director General is appointed?
Your last question, no. What's happening is that we're waiting, and we expect it to be imminent, the publication of the Green Paper. The Green Paper will be the government's attempt to secure consultation. And between the Green Paper and the White Paper, which will be their outcome, what they plan to do, we will be in heavy conversation and discussions about the Charter, about the purpose of the BBC, about the way it's regulated, about the composition of the board, all the issues, and fundamentally what the mission is. We then also have a parallel discussion is how do we fund that? The funding model will be another major. That will continue Tim Davey is the Director General of the BBC, and he's helping us through that. He will continue to do that. So that cannot be paused awaiting the arrival of a new Director General. This is a matter of some urgency. We are in debate, we'll discuss it, we'll do that. On the matter of staff morale, I think this is a very, very important part. We have a very continuous measurement of staff morale. It's a very detailed look, and we're always looking at it. It is, as I said right at the beginning, you know, the events that have come recently has been something that I deeply regret, and it has had an impact, of course, on the thousands of people. So we will be measuring that and trying to make sure that we include them in as we develop our arguments.
Yeah, just briefly, what is the thing for measuring staff morale?
Metric for measuring it.
But how do you do it? Like what happens to measure it?
Well, we have go through effectively what you'd call a survey, a staff survey, and it's reported every year in our annual report. We do a comprehensive staff survey, and we do it in all sorts of different parts, so we can break it down, we can see where morale is, and not just morale, but loads of other factors. I can send you, if you would like, the detail of how we measure how the staff are thinking in a systematic, comprehensive way. But as you say, I also talk to staff, I have regular lunches with them, so I get a more anecdotal approach to it. But it's important that I actually meet staff and I see them face to face and not just numbers on a sheet. But we do have numbers on a sheet, and we do it very comprehensively, and we report it in the annual report.
Actually, not quite, because the question was about how they feel in terms of confidence in terms of the BBC leadership. Is that one of your questions within the survey?
It is a question that's going on. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear yet. Everything is asked.
Thank you, Vicky. Just finally, in terms of penultimately, in terms of staff morale, in 2023 the BBC had 8 equal pay cases open. Last year, our predecessor committee was told that there were 11, so it went up between 2023 and 2024. Do you know how many there are now?
I do not, but I can get you the figures.
If I was to tell you that I'd heard that there were 40 equal pay
40.
cases. Yes, that's what's being reported to us. I would really be very grateful if you could look into that and come back.
I will look into that and find out what the reasons for that increase
and
is.
If in fact that figure is
correct. If that is the figure.
Yeah,
yes.
Thank you. And then finally, the BBC shared in confidence with us the initial response to Mr Prescott's memo by Peter Johnson, which is the one that the board commissioned. Did you consider publishing that
report?
Yeah.
I didn't consider publishing it. It was important for me when the board discussed Mr Prescott's memo that they had a full and rounded picture of what did take place over the 3 years. You have challenged Mr Prescott on his selection. I think it was important when the board discussed it, they had a proper picture of all the different things we did consider and the actions we did take.
So would you be happy for us to publish that response?
Can I come back to you on that, because it was a private note?
Yes.
For the board, and
we think that it's quite helpful in setting out all the issues and
indeed,
going through
it
them
would,
one by one.
And I think I will reflect on that and try and look at it positively, because I think it slightly goes back to your point about speed. We do this work quite quickly. I asked for it to be done straight away because we were having a board meeting. We had the response, but we kept it to ourselves. And to me, it becomes part of this examination. What lessons can we learn about this? We've done it, but also about the speed of action and what we can do and how we can publish more, be more transparent, so we're not on the back foot. And we need to understand the world we live in, and that if you don't get out on the front foot, then they will fill that vacuum with whatever they want to say. I think it's a really important point.
With that pace in mind, could you let us know quickly?
I will let you know, great pace.
And also whether you're going to be publishing the new Peter Johnson report that you mentioned in response to Damien's questions as well. That's very kind. Thank you very much. Thank you all of you for appearing in front of us today. Is there any further messages that you want to leave us with?
Oh, I think that's fine.
You've had enough. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for everyone's time
Thank you.
today. Order.